I was halfway through my night shift soup when the knock came. It wasn't a friendly tap, but a firm, deliberate sound that echoed through the walls of my little house in Port Townsend. I looked up, startled. The wind outside had been howling since sunset, carrying the scent of the sea and that winter sharpness that never quite lets go. I pulled the throw blanket tighter around my shoulders and stood, the spoon clinking against the bowl as I set it down. My porch light flickered on automatically when I opened the door, and that's when I saw the patrol car. The blue and white cruiser parked just off my driveway, lights still spinning but silent. A young officer stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He looked barely older than my son would have been if he were alive. "Vivian Blake?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. I nodded slowly, already sensing the dread clawing at my chest. "We need to talk. There's been an accident. A man and a young boy were rushed to the emergency room. The names, Daniel Blake and Aiden Blake." The porch spun beneath my feet. I gripped the doorframe like it could stop time. My lips moved, but it took a moment for words to come out. "That's not possible," I whispered. They died 5 years ago." The officer hesitated. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me. Right now." I didn't change out of my scrubs. I didn't even grab my coat. I just followed him into the rain, numb, my mind looping that same sentence. They died. I buried them. I saw the ring. I cried over their ashes. We drove in silence. The only sound was the hiss of the tires on wet asphalt and the occasional squawk of the police radio. I stared out the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass, and tried to make sense of the impossible. 5 years ago, Daniel had taken Aiden on a fishing trip off the coast. A freak storm hit. The boat was found wrecked. Only his wedding ring came back to me, scratched and cold in a plastic evidence bag. I had collapsed to my knees when they gave it to me. I remembered the salt on my lips, the sound of the sea, the way grief hollowed out everything I thought I knew. And now a knock on my door. A name. 2 names. Daniel Blake. Aiden Blake. Alive? As we neared the hospital, the officer finally spoke again. There was a collision. A black sedan hit the median on Highway 101. 1 male driver. 1 child in the back seat. Both transported unconscious. A third person, a woman, was in the front passenger seat. I turned sharply. "A woman?" He nodded. "Also injured. Stable condition. Registered name, Sophie Lang. Listed as spouse." That name. I hadn't heard it in years, but it landed like a thunderclap. Sophie had worked at Daniel's firm. I'd met her once at the Christmas party. Polished, charming, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's drink order and smiled a little too long at my husband. I looked down at my hands and realized I was trembling. Rain had soaked through my sleeves. My skin was freezing, but my blood burned. "Ma'am," the officer said, "are you okay?" I didn't answer. I wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The dead were walking again, and the woman who'd stood too close to my husband might have been wearing my name for the last 5 years. "Take me to them," I said quietly. "Now." The hospital looked exactly the same as it had 5 years ago. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the faint antiseptic scent that clung to every hallway. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a nurse. I was walking in as a ghost who had just been told her family never really died. The officer led me through the emergency entrance, without a word. His name was Officer Bell, I'd learned in the car, though it hardly mattered now. My mind could barely hold on to anything other than the image of Daniel's face and Aiden's. My son. My little boy who used to sleep with a stuffed whale and whisper, "Mommy," sing the sea song. My baby who had vanished into the ocean with his father. My baby who now apparently had another mother. We passed through security and were met by a senior nurse who whispered urgently into the officer's ear. He turned to me with a tight expression. "Daniel Blake, he's in surgery now. Serious head trauma. They're doing everything they can." He paused, then added, "The child is stable. He's with the woman, Sophie Lang." I didn't speak. I simply nodded. Words had started to feel useless. The pediatric ward was on the third floor. Each step up the stairwell felt like trudging through wet sand. My scrubs were still damp from the rain. My shoes squeaked. I kept hearing echoes of another version of myself, the woman who once worked these halls and believed in the finality of death. The hallway was quiet when we arrived. Dim light, pale blue walls. At the end of the corridor stood a hospital social worker with a badge that read Elena Chin. She gave me a kind, strained smile. "Mrs. Blake, I'm here to support you, but I need to prepare you. This situation is complicated. The child is conscious but confused. He's asking for Sophie. He believes she's his mother." I almost laughed. Or maybe I choked. I couldn't tell anymore. "His name is Aiden," I said through gritted teeth. "And I am his mother." Elena didn't argue. She simply looked at the closed door to room 307. "Whenever you're ready." I walked forward slowly, heart pounding. Through the glass pane, I saw a child sitting upright in a hospital bed. Light brown curls, a small frame, a bandage across his temple. There was no doubt he was mine. He looked like Daniel in the jaw, but the eyes, those were mine. My Aiden. And then I saw her, Sophie, sitting beside him like she belonged there, holding his hand, stroking his hair. When she noticed me, her body went rigid. She stood up slowly, her mouth parted. For a second, her face turned the color of ash. "Vivian," she whispered. I opened the door. The silence that followed was unbearable. Aiden turned to Sophie, his voice soft, afraid. "Mom, who is that?" "Mom." He called her Mom. My breath caught. My knees nearly gave way. I hadn't heard him speak in 5 years. And when he finally did, it was to ask who I was. I looked at him, my little boy, now a stranger wrapped in white sheets. "Aiden," I said, stepping forward. He blinked at me in confusion. "My name's Ethan," he said. I froze in place. That name again. Ethan. A name that didn't belong in our family. A name stitched onto a lie. I turned to Sophie and my voice broke. "What have you done to him?" Sophie didn't answer me right away. She stood frozen at the foot of the hospital bed, her arms slightly raised as if shielding herself from something invisible but inevitable. Guilt poured off her in waves, but I wasn't here for her shame. I was here for the truth. "Vivian," she said at last, voice trembling. "He doesn't remember." I stepped forward, heat rising in my throat. "Because you made sure he wouldn't." She flinched. Aiden, no Ethan, as he had been taught to say, looked back and forth between us, his small face pale and confused. I hated that he looked scared, but I hated more that he was scared of me. The door opened behind us, and Officer Bell re-entered with a second man, older, more authoritative, his suit soaked from the rain. "Mrs. Blake," he said, flashing a badge. "Detective Marcus Hale. I need to speak with you privately." I shook my head. "Not until I understand what's going on." The detective exchanged a glance with Sophie, who sat back down beside Aiden. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we found evidence suggesting your husband may have orchestrated his disappearance." It wasn't a suggestion. Not the way he said it. My body went numb. "In Daniel's wallet," he continued, "we found multiple IDs under the name Ethan Jones. A marriage certificate listing him and Sophie Lang. Credit cards. Address in Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff. The West. The desert. As far from the sea as one could get. He's been living there for years," Hale added, "under a false identity." The hospital room blurred in my vision. "And Aiden? He's been with them the entire time." The detective nodded. "We believe so. And according to neighbors we've contacted, he's been raised exclusively as Ethan Jones. That name is on school records, doctor files, everything. Daniel passed Sophie off as his wife. She's been his primary contact for the boy." My stomach twisted. He hadn't just left. He'd erased me, erased our life. For what? I asked, barely above a whisper. "Why do all of this?" Detective Hale hesitated before answering. Life insurance. I looked at him, eyes wide. He continued. Shortly before the accident 5 years ago, Daniel took out a $3 million life insurance policy in your name, with himself as beneficiary. I almost laughed. Almost. Except I didn't die. No, Hale said. But you did something he didn't expect. You demanded an extended investigation. You hired a lawyer. You refused to settle. I remembered it clearly now. The hours spent in the coroner's office. The questions. The lack of bodies. The ring they gave me. It never felt right. And because I didn't let it go, they didn't get the money. They waited, Hale said. And when the payout stalled, they moved on. Started a new life in Arizona. New names. New story. Same lie. Behind me, I heard Aiden whisper something to Sophie. She leaned in, murmured softly. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. That boy, the one who once called me Mommy, was looking at her like she was the only home he'd ever known. And Daniel, the man who used to trace constellations on my back while we listened to the tide, he had vanished into the desert and left me to drown in the ocean alone. I turned to Detective Hale. My voice was steady now. I want my son back. The ICU smelled like bleach and inevitability. Every hallway hummed with low mechanical noise, the beeping of monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the gentle whisper of nurses trying not to disturb the thin line between life and death. I walked behind the doctor in silence, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug crescents into my palms. Daniel Blake lay behind curtain 7, the same man who once built a cradle for our baby by hand, who kissed my forehead before every night shift, who held my hand at my father's funeral. Now he was barely recognizable. His face was bloated from trauma, half his skull wrapped in thick gauze. Tubes protruded from his nose and mouth, machines surrounding him like vultures waiting for a sign. A small screen blinked with his vitals, shaky, inconsistent. But there, he was alive, breathing, and I hated him for it. The doctor stepped back, giving me space. He's not conscious, but sometimes patients in comas can hear voices. You're welcome to speak with him. I nodded, though I didn't know what I'd say. My legs carried me forward on instinct. I sat beside his bed and looked at his left hand. Bare. No wedding ring. The ring they gave me all those years ago, scratched cold, supposedly found floating near the wreckage, was sitting in a velvet box in my bedroom, right next to a folded flag from the Coast Guard. I had mourned over it, kissed it, whispered goodnight to it. And now it meant nothing. A prop in a performance. A lie cast into the sea. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to breathe, trying to understand how this man could have looked me in the eyes and told me he loved me while planning my erasure. Why? I whispered, "Why would you do this?" Daniel didn't move, didn't twitch, but I kept speaking. I looked for you. I prayed. I sat on the beach every weekend waiting for the tide to change. And all that time, you were in the desert with her. With him. I looked down at the wedding ring on my own finger. I hadn't taken it off in 5 years. My therapist had once told me that grief isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live around the loss. But I hadn't lived. I'd waited. I'd believed in ghosts. You took my son, I said, voice cracking. You gave him another name, another mother. You let him forget me. My eyes burned, but the tears didn't fall. Not yet. I reached out and touched Daniel's hand. It was warm, human, not the corpse I'd imagined 100 times in my nightmares. If this is your legacy, I said softly, then mine will be to undo it. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Detective Hale returned, his face unreadable. We've completed the fingerprint match. It's confirmed. Your son is Aiden Blake. We're starting custody proceedings, but it won't be easy. I stood up, still staring at the man in the bed. Nothing about this is easy. He nodded slowly. One more thing. Sophie Lang is requesting to speak with you, privately. I inhaled sharply. Tell her I'll come, but not as his wife. not as the woman she stole from. I looked once more at Daniel's broken body. His chest rose and fell like a tide too stubborn to stop. "I'll come as his mother," I said, "and hers." Daniel regained consciousness 3 days later. I was there when his eyes opened. He blinked slowly, disoriented, then turned his head just enough to see me standing at the foot of the bed. His gaze trembled when it recognized me, like a man waking up in the wrong life. For a second, we just stared at each other in silence. The machines buzzed softly between us. He didn't speak right away, but I didn't need him to. The officers arrived that same afternoon. I was allowed to be present during the questioning, under one condition: I say nothing until they finished. So I stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the man I once built a life with try to explain why he burned it all down. Detective Hale kept his tone measured. "Daniel Blake, you're being questioned regarding allegations of fraud, identity theft, and parental abduction. You have the right to remain silent." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was no fight left. He spoke softly, hoarsely. "It was my idea. The accident. The IDs. Everything. I couldn't breathe in that life anymore. I didn't want a divorce. I just wanted out. Completely." He glanced at me once, brief, almost shameful, then looked away. "Sophie and I were already involved," he said. "But I knew Vivian would never let me go without a fight and never give up Aiden. So we made a plan. A fishing trip. No bodies. Just enough wreckage to be believable. I made sure the ring was damaged. Looked like it had been through something." He paused, swallowing hard. "We moved to Arizona under new names. She became Rebecca. I became Ethan. Aiden, we started calling him that too. He cried for weeks. Asked for his mom. But Sophie was patient. She kept reminding him. Slowly he stopped asking. My hands trembled, fingernails digging into my arms. I bit down on the scream, rising in my throat. The detective asked calmly, "Why the life insurance?" Daniel's voice cracked. "We thought it would be quick. A payout. A way to disappear with a cushion. But Vivian wouldn't let it go. She asked too many questions. The insurance stalled. We gave up on it, eventually. Tried to move on." "By stealing a child," Hale said flatly. Daniel said nothing. The next day, he signed a confession. Later, the court granted me temporary custody of Aiden. The psychologist recommended a gradual transition. No forced confrontations. No ripping him away from the world he knew. Just quiet, deliberate presence. Rebuilding trust, not memory. I agreed. The first time I visited Aiden's hospital room alone, he looked at me like a stranger. Sophie had been transferred to another facility. The bed beside him was empty. "Hi," I said, holding out a photo. "This is your second birthday. I made the cake myself. Blue icing, your favorite." He studied the picture. The boy in it had frosting on his cheeks and wore a crown made of construction paper. His smile was crooked, familiar. "I don't remember that," he said. "That's okay," I whispered. "You don't have to." Each day, I brought something new. A story, a stuffed whale, a seashell from Port Townsend's beach. Something real. Something mine. Eventually, he asked, "Are you really my mom?" I nodded, tears quietly slipping down my face. "I gave birth to you. I raised you for your first 3 years. I sang you the sea song." He didn't answer, but that night when I left the room, he said something that stopped me cold. "Good night, Miss Vivian." Not Mom. Not yet, but it was a beginning. The first time Aiden laughed around me, it was over something small. I had tripped on the hospital chair leg, classic clumsy nurse move, and spilled a cup of apple juice across my sleeve. He giggled. Not a full belly laugh. Just a quick, surprised chuckle, but it was real. And it didn't come from fear. That sound lit something inside me I thought had long since gone out. Each day I returned, bringing pieces of the past. A plush stuffed whale named Wally. A bedtime book we used to read. A drawing of a boat with his crooked, 3-year-old handwriting. Sometimes he looked at them with blank confusion. Other times, something flickered behind his eyes, like a light trying to remember how to turn on. But he still called me Miss Vivian, and I still answered with love. Dr. Lauren Patel, the child psychologist, warned me not to rush. "Don't chase memories," she said gently. "Just create space for them to return on their own, if they do." So I sat beside his bed every evening, reading aloud stories we used to love. I showed him photos, birthdays, beach trips, Sunday pancakes. Some he stared at quietly. Others he handed back with an indifferent shrug. But one evening he surprised me. We were looking at a photo of him wearing blue overalls and holding a balloon shaped like a fish. He tilted his head. "Was that my favorite?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "That was your 3rd birthday. You cried when the balloon popped." He didn't laugh, but he nodded almost to himself. Later that same night, he asked, "Why do I have 2 names?" I braced myself. "Because you had 2 lives," I said gently. "You were born Aiden Blake. That's the name I gave you. But for the last 5 years, you've been called Ethan Jones." He looked down at his blanket. "Is Dad a bad guy?" I sat still, the weight of that question enormous. "I think Dad made a very big mistake," I said. "And mistakes hurt people. But I think he still loved you." He nodded again. "Do you love me?" I leaned forward, reaching for his small hand. "I never stopped." A week later, the court granted me full legal custody, with a gradual reintegration plan overseen by Dr. Patel. Sophie had been sentenced to 5 years, Daniel 7. Their bail had been denied. I didn't attend the hearings. I couldn't bear to see either of them again. Aiden moved in with me shortly after. The first few nights were hard. He cried for Sophie in his sleep, woke up confused, disoriented, calling out "Mom." But not for me. I sat outside his room, pressing my forehead to the door, letting his grief burn through me. Then one morning, just before dawn, I heard small footsteps. He came into my room, dragging his blanket, and climbed silently into bed beside me. He curled up against my side and whispered, "I don't know if I'm Aiden or Ethan today, but I feel safe." I wrapped my arms around him and didn't speak. We didn't need words. Some nights he still wakes up crying. Some days he calls me Vivian. Other days he slips and Mom escapes before he catches it and stumbles. I never correct him. Healing isn't linear. Memory isn't loyalty. I'm not fighting for who he used to be. I'm learning who he is now, and I'll meet him there. Every time. Rebecca Lang, no, Sophie had asked to see Aiden. The request came through her court-appointed attorney a month after the sentencing. She was serving her time in a medium-security facility outside Spokane, and the request was worded carefully. Supervised visitation in consideration of her 5-year maternal role. My first instinct was rage. The very idea that she deserved access to him after what she did felt obscene. But Dr. Patel urged caution. "He remembers her," she said, "not as a villain, but as the person who packed his lunch and kissed his scraped knees. We can't erase 5 years." Erase. That word lingered. They had tried to erase me. And yet here I was, holding my son's hand through nightmares, teaching him how to ride a bike again, laughing when he declared vegetables are evil with the dramatic flair only a child could conjure. The bond was growing, not from memory but from choice, from presence. So I said yes. One visit. Supervised. Nothing more. That morning, Aiden was quiet. He wore the blue hoodie I bought him for his first week of school and clutched Wally the Whale to his chest. When I asked if he wanted to bring anything else, he shook his head. The visitation room was a sterile space with 2 white walls and 2 plastic chairs. Sophie was already inside when we arrived. She looked smaller, paler, her hair pulled back, her eyes red. She stood when she saw him. "Ethan," she whispered. He didn't move. I stepped aside but remained in the room. A court officer stood in the corner. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Aiden spoke, barely audible. My name's Aiden now. Sophie swallowed. I know, sweetheart. I've missed you. He looked down. You lied. Tears filled her eyes. I did. And I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought we could be a family. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. His voice was flat, simple, not angry, just a child stating the truth. Sophie nodded, lips trembling. I know. He looked over at me, then back at her. Mom says people can make big mistakes and still love you. A long silence followed. Is that true? He asked. Sophie's breath caught. Yes, I do love you. He didn't respond. He simply walked to me, took my hand and said, I'm ready to go home. We walked out in silence. No tears, no drama, just the weight of something final settling behind us. In the car, he leaned against me. Is she still my mom? I thought for a long time before answering. She loved you. She raised you for 5 years. That's real. But I gave birth to you. I've never stopped looking for you. And I will never leave again. He nodded. Okay. Later that night, he whispered as I tucked him in, if I have 2 moms, does that mean I have 2 hearts? I smiled. Maybe it just means yours is big enough for both. He drifted off to sleep with Wally in his arms, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't dream of the sea swallowing everything I loved. I dreamt of my son walking toward me whole. 6 months later, we returned to the beach. It wasn't the same shore where I had last seen Daniel and Aiden disappear into the gray morning fog 5 years ago. That beach, our old life, belonged to another woman now, a younger version of me, one who still believed love alone could keep people anchored. This beach was different, quiet, gentle, just north of Port Townsend, tucked behind a row of cedar trees and tall grass. It felt untouched, secret, like it had waited for us to come home. Aiden ran ahead, his small figure zigzagging along the tide line with a bucket in one hand and a net in the other. The wind caught the edges of his jacket, making him look like a little blue kite soaring across the sand. I sat on a blanket, wrapped in a wool shawl, sipping from a thermos. The ocean no longer made me ache. Its rhythm was steady, soothing, honest. Aiden had just started at his new school. He was adjusting well, according to his teachers. Bright, curious, quiet. He answered to both names now. Some days he was Aiden, some days Ethan. I let him choose. Dr. Patel said identity, for children, isn't a destination, it's a journey. And I was walking that road beside him. Every Thursday we went to therapy. Every Saturday we baked muffins. Every night I sang the sea song. Sometimes he cried for Sophie. I let him. Sometimes he asked about Daniel. I answered as gently as I could. He didn't want to visit his father in prison. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I didn't push. That choice belonged to him. As for Daniel, he'd written letters. I read the first one, then put it away. It wasn't forgiveness I needed, it was distance. I had spent too many years drowning in his absence. I wasn't going to drown in his guilt. Aiden's voice pulled me back. Mom. I turned. He held something up in his hand, running toward me, barefoot, grinning. I found a spiral shell, like in that picture. I smiled and opened my arms as he barreled into me. We examined it together. It was small and pale pink, swirled like a memory. You want to keep it? I asked. He nodded. For the shelf. We had started a collection. One shell for each moment we chose to move forward. We didn't keep the perfect ones, only the ones that had cracks, the ones that had survived the tide. Later, as the sun began to sink, we sat side by side, our toes buried in the cool sand. Mom, he said, voice quiet, was I really gone? I looked out over the water, then back at him. You were never really gone, just hidden, like this shell. He nodded, thoughtful. And now, he asked. Now, I said, wrapping an arm around his shoulder, you're home. He leaned against me, warm and solid and real. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt grounded, present, alive. I had spent 5 years mourning ghosts. But here, on this quiet stretch of coast, I realized something simple and extraordinary. This wasn't a story about what was lost. It was about what I chose to reclaim. My son, my voice, myself. And in the end, the waves didn't take everything from me. They gave something back.